What was the industry like back then in Toronto? Back then there was a high volume of business based on tax shelter business where, producers would, through brokerage houses, go to individual dentists and development and attorneys, and they would create financing through what were in essence tax shelter schemes where you were investing in movies for tax write-offs because a lot of people had a lot of money and they were trying to shelter their money.
The film industry was kind of ramping up. There were a few big American productions that had come through town, like, I'd done extra work on Police Academy and Police Academy 3. Those were kind of the big things. And I was really just breaking in, so I wasn't that familiar.
I think there was more work. I think there were more local projects happening. I did a lot of TV. There were a lot of shows being filmed, CBC things, and so I don't know. I think that there was a lot of theater, and the pool of actors was maybe not as extensive as it is now. So there was lots of stuff to do.
It was a little cottage industry. There was a handful of decent producers. And I joined Alliance Entertainment at the very year that it was incorporated. And Robert Lantos, who was a Montreal native, came to Toronto to set up his company, and he met these other producers, John Kemeny, Andres Hamori, and Robert Cooper, and they decided to form an alliance, like a mini studio.
And I think back in those days, Robert Lantos and Denis Aroux and some of the better producers were quite skilled at creating tax shelter production. And I think the Gate at the time was structured in a similar way by Alliance.
Alliance revitalized the Canadian film industry. And of course our dollar was low, so we began to get a lot of productions up here. Like we are today is routine. Then it was rare, just beginning. And the Gate was one of those pictures.
We consecrate this ground, this world of light. We curse the abominations of darkness.
Well, back in 1987, there really were very few studios. It was just Kleinberg, where we shot, was one of the main studios. We all seemed to end up there. And there weren't a lot of, not a lot of TV or feature films being done in Toronto. It was just growing, the industry. Basically started around 1980 and then got to be very, very busy.
I think The Gate might have been my second movie or something. So, to me it was all very new and exciting and the unknown.
This was like mid-level feature as far as funding went.
It was a little $5 million Canadian production. $5 million Canadian. It was only like $3 US. And considering what came out of it, it was quite a bargain.
Well, our crew on that back then, on The Gate, a lot of those people were all quite young. The crew was young. We were all in our late 20s and early 20s, and those people have carried on. I mean, we all got in at ground level. We all did all departments, or all parts of our department. So it was a small crew. So you would, now where that crew was probably Woodrow was 2 or 3 people. Now it's up to 12 and 13 on a crew. And just because things are bigger and there's more special effects. But back then we all were very junior. We didn't have a lot of experience, so we all kind of banded together and tried to figure out how to do our job.
Hi.
I remember this particular film came to town, and it was we were shown some pictures at the agency of these monsters, and like they're looking for monsters to be in this movie, and we didn't know they were going to be 12 inches tall. We thought these big monsters, so they wanted what they used to call special business performers to do this, and I was also dabbling in some stunt work at the time, so I got the call.
Working with the minions was hilarious because, they've got, these guys are in these costumes, these latex costumes, and they're sweating like mad.
They were encouraged not to drink a lot of coffee or sodas or anything, or water, as the day went on, and they just, the poor things, and it was hot, you know, it was summer, so they spent a lot of time sweating and sleeping and waiting, because, you know, it's big camera setup, so lots of waiting time.
Well, the suits were incredible. I mean, for the kind of budget the film had, these things were spectacular. They consisted of a headpiece, a torso, arms with long fingers, leg pieces, and big feet. Now, the first day, they really hadn't put anybody in one of these suits before, so they didn't really know how it was going to go. And you had to go up into the torso bit through the bottom, like this. And the shoulders were molded down to like it was like a short sleeve, right? But they were molded down, and they didn't move. These things were really solid, really heavy. So actually having to get in and try and get your arm through this thing and down, and it was, you had to be a contortionist at the top, you know, and I think they were covering it with baby powder, if I remember properly, to try and slide us into these things. So it took a hell of a long time that first day. I think there were only 3 of us on that day. And we shot the first scene where you first see them, where she has the flashlight. She comes out and sees the 3 minutes. And Randy Cook, who's an absolute genius at this stuff, was using this old-timey Hollywood technique. And I'd never been involved in anything like that before. And I was like, what the heck are they doing? Everything on the floor is huge. And wait, they're standing up on that little platform over there, and it's all the same, but it's normal sized, you know? So it took them quite a while to bring it together in the camera. But once you see it in the film, it's spectacular. You know, I remember the first time I saw this, I couldn't believe it. You know, because once you put the head on, you had the big eyes, which of course you started to heat up inside, so they fogged up. So all you had was this little tiny mouth to look out of. And so that first day when the girl came out with the flashlight, she's over there, and I'm over here. Like if you remember in the movie, she steps down and one of them jumps back. Well, that was me. And I'm not even looking at her. She's far, far away. I'm looking at me. I'm just waiting for Randy to give me my cue. You know, you're standing there being all minion-y. And Randy's like, jump back! And so you jump back, and it's like, you're just hoping for the best. And so we did that for a good, couple hours. And then, of course, you start to sweat. And the sweat collects in the big hollow fingers. And so if you lift your hand up, you get a nice shower of your own sweat. It was glamorous.
Tibor, I think, had an instinct for his work. I think he was great both with the people who produced the effects that he needed and also the actors. When I looked at the film recently, I was astonished at how good the kids are in it. And they're consistent, like you don't have a couple of them being really quite good and the others not quite understanding what sort of story they're in. They are consistently sold on what they're doing and buy in and perform really, really well, and that's got to be him. That's got to be his work.
It was a really fun shoot to be on with all the kids, and these are young kids that are being kids as well as being actors, so they were constantly having to be wrangled.
My primary task was wrangling those kids and getting them to set, and it was a task.
I remember Stephen Dorff usually running around the set like a madman. I don't know, what was he, 10, 11 at the time? It was his first thing he ever did. And I remember a lot of running and screaming.
They were tough, hoarding those kids, I'll tell you. It wasn't easy. And they were constantly screaming at me. The producers, John Kemeny, I'm pretty sure he fell through the floor screaming at me because the kids weren't on set.
One of the last days, we had like 27 pages to do by lunch. We had some remarkably large amount of work to do, and we had a main unit shooting outside at the mock-up of where the hole to hell was, where all the effects were happening that were mostly physical effects, wind machines and massive physical effects that you would do in a computer today. And we were up at the set working on the 3rd floor, and I was working with Randy. And that was considered a second unit, but it was as big as our main unit. And we were all standing there, and I think we were on our 20th hour, and we were sitting there waiting because we were trading the cast back and forth. You know, the main unit would get the cast for a period of time, and they would shoot their effect, they would shoot their plate, and then they'd release the cast in, thankfully, the same wardrobe, and they'd come running up to where we were, and we'd place them, and we'd shoot them. So we're all standing around waiting, and I remember John Kemeny coming, and I was so tired. I'd been up for like 8 days, and John's big head and big face was in my peripheral at one point. It just came in like an effect, and I looked over, and he said, "Why aren't you shooting? Why aren't you shooting?" And I said, "Well, we got nothing to shoot, right? We're waiting for cast." And he said, "Oh."
And somebody said he was screaming to me, screaming at me, or "Where's Kathleen? Where are those kids?" You know, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly he was gone.
And then I looked over, I think at Randy, and then I looked back and there was nothing there but air. And he had taken a wrong step, and he had stepped on a part of the set that wasn't properly supported. And he fell through 3 floors right onto, and he landed on one of the Brochu families, one of the carpenters, and rolled and was on a couch. And I remember that, you know, the people around the camera, including myself, went,
You know, everyone rushed the set to see what had gone on, and good, maybe we don't have to shoot for, you know, an hour, maybe we get a break. That would be great. We can all just sit around and talk.
and I'll never forget, John was looking up at us even though he was half conscious, and he was saying, "Keep shooting, keep shooting." And that, of course, is a memory that I will have till the end of my days.
Got to be kidding.
We were shooting at night, and we were all outside, and it was tense as always. It was kind of cold. Everybody had their jackets on. It was fall by now, and it, you know, when you're working long hours and you get tired, you get a little punchy and you get giggly. And Liz was sitting on an electrical box where all the lines were fed into, and he's chatting away to probably Stephen Dorff or somebody, I don't know who. And all of a sudden, I looked over and there were sparks coming out from under his coat. And we were all like, "Ah, Lewis, get up!" And I don't know if his coat was dangling and caught something, and we were just like in tears laughing. It was, you know, one of those really funny moments. And his poor mother was standing there looking stunned, you know, as her child nearly got electrocuted.
I think because of the failings of production, the failings of my department, and all of us associated with me, I don't think that we planned the movie as well as we should have. I think we underestimated the demands of the movie, and ergo we underestimated the demands on the cast. And I think considering what the final product was and what they were able to deliver in a convincing way, and the fact that we're still talking about this movie so many years later, is a good indication that they were a lot better at their jobs than we were.
Mom! Dad!
He imagines, my son imagines that I've come home and it's, of course, a terrible time and everything's going wrong, and suddenly, although he worries about what we're going to see and what we're going to find, I think all of a sudden he thinks it's great that Dad's there. Dad's going to fix everything. And of course, I'm an illusion. I'm a nightmare for him, or an effect of the supernatural. And I say, "You've been bad," and then I turn into this mass of pulp and fluid, and my head falls off. So they had to create a prosthetic head for me. And so I went to LA for that, and spent a couple of days there. And of course, it looks amazing when he reaches out and touches my face. And people tease me about it. You know, I taught for years at a college, local college, and the kids used to find stuff. They desperately want to find things you've done, and you know that they'd often come up with that, and they'd come into the lecture and say, you know. "Mr. Denton, if I don't hand in my essay today, will you tell me I've been bad?" You know, like this is, you know. But it was a great effect.
There were things that were going on that were so eye-opening. I remember the work was incredibly hard. I remember being unbelievably impressed by Bill Beaton, the designer, who understood the concept of forced perspective, who understood how, you know, minion monster elements that have to be staged in such a way against the back wall or a window had to be positioned based on lens arcs and camera positions so that a life-size element would look miniature to the audience. Like, did I know any of this? I didn't know anything. I don't think very many of us really did. Perhaps Randy did, and perhaps Tibor did, because Tibor had storyboarded the whole movie extensively. And I remember the poor guy was walking around with these big 3-ring binders and constantly looking for his frame to go, oh yeah, it's that, which of course always conflicted with lunch and always conflicted with what was actually physically possible. Back in those days, we created the effects physically inside the camera, which I don't think I've ever seen since. Also, it was just an extraordinarily ambitious project for the budget, which you always hear.
None of us really knew what it was going to look like, what these shots were going to look like, except Tibor and Randy. They had a pretty good idea. So one day it came to the crunch week, where we had to have that picture not only locked, but all the effect shots in, because we were coming up to the final mix, and the effects people were needing to finish their work. So Tibor was in the cutting room in Toronto, and I was with him Monday to Thursday, 12-hour days, right? Friday morning we came back in the cutting room, and about Friday evening, I was running out to the airport to pick up these shots, as Randy was doing them in Los Angeles, putting them on the plane. I'd go out and get them, bring them back. Tibor would drop them into the picture, have a look at them, get on the phone to Randy, and they'd discuss it and go from there. But like, you know, there was over like 100 visual effect shots in that movie. There was a lot of shots. And we didn't have very many at the end of that week. We only had till Monday to get them all in. So by supper time on Friday night, I phoned my wife and said, honey, I'm not coming home for supper tonight. About 11 o'clock, I phoned her and said, honey, I'm not coming home tonight. Tibor and I are working all night on the picture. Randy's shooting down south, and I'm going out to the airport to get the stuff and bringing it back.